first.
Oh yeah, I can read it.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Have your moments, you know.
Okay, cool.
Alrighty, y'all. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Ro Kelly. I am a bookseller here at Left Bank, and I, along with our whole team, welcome you to Left Bank Books. Tonight, we welcome nationally best-selling author, award-winning podcaster, and science journalist Annalee Newitz to celebrate their new novel, Automatic Noodle, the cozy near-future novella about a crew of leftover robots opening up their very own noodle shop. So notes before we begin, tonight's event is possible because of your support. When you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into the local economy, funding your streets, parks, and more. And it also helps writers get the support they deserve and allows us to produce events like this. So thank you all for shopping local and for being here tonight. We at Left Bank Books are always working to plan new events for readers of all kinds. On August 27th, we are welcoming Jo Firestone and her hilarious debut murder mystery, Murder on Sex Island. And that one's going to be here in store. And then on August 11th, we also have Scott Anderson is going to be here to discuss his new nonfiction book, King of Kings, which is a narrative history of the Iranian Revolution in the 1970s. So if either of those sound compelling to you, please join us back here at Left Bank. And if neither sound compelling, please check out our website. There's so many other events, I swear. And tonight's event. Annalee Newitz is the nationally best-selling author of the nonfiction books Four Lost Cities, A Secret History of the Urban Age, and Stories Are Weapons, Psychological Warfare and the American Mind, as well as the novels The Terraformers, The Future of Another Timeline, and Autonomous. As a science journalist, they are a writer for the New York Times and so many other places, it seems like, and they have a monthly column in New Scientist. They also are the co-hosts of the 3-time Hugo Award-winning podcast, Our Opinions Are Correct, among many other accomplishments and awards. And Annalee will be in conversation with Crystal Odell. Crystal is the author of Trans Studies and is an overall storyteller of trans, polyamorous, and horror practices. Their stories have appeared in several literary magazines and journals, and Crystal was a Lambda Literary Fellow and Tin House Scholar and was nominated for Best of Net at that time. She currently serves as chapbooks editor at Newfound and is an academic and administrative coordinator for the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at WashU. And tonight's book, I think that this book list review really said it best. This sweet, heart, and stomach-warming novella is a certified cozy read, rich with meaning for queer readers and enjoyably familiar to San Francisco lovers. Perfect for fans both of Becky Chambers' Monthly Robot series and the Travis Baldry's Legends and Lattes. Newitz has gifted readers with a hopeful post-apocalyptic found family tale. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for listening to me for so long. Without further ado, while you all are here, let's give a warm welcome to Annalee Newitz.
Really great to be back here. I love St. Louis and I love Cahokia, which I've written about a lot. So I've stayed here a lot and gone across the river many times to visit cities that were here, 1,000 years ago. So basically the point is there've been great cities here for over 1,000 years. So I was going to start by just reading to you a little bit from the book to give you a taste of what's to come if you haven't read it yet. And so this is a story about 4 robots and a human friend, and they're living kind of in the near future in the 2060s in San Francisco after California has won a war of independence against the United States. And so this is a new nation that is recovering from a really devastating war that's 5 years in the past. And so the 4 robot characters have been helping to rebuild the city. And part of the way they're doing that is they want to open just a nice noodle restaurant and feed people and make some money so that they can have a roof over their head. And so I'm reading you a section here which is about one of the robots. Her name is Sweetie, and she, before the war, was nailed down into a bank kiosk. And so she looks like a human from the waist up, a human woman designed by some guy who thought that he should make her pretty, so he made her into a blonde white woman because that was his idea of what would be a cute bank teller. But from the waist down, she has 3 metal legs that have wheels on the end. And her arc in the story is that she's not super psyched about how she was made to look. And she's kind of on a journey to figure out how she wants to look. And this is a scene about kind of how she does that. And so she's gone shopping in downtown San Francisco. She's actually there to pick up some sunflower oil for the restaurant, but she decides to take a detour and visit an old friend of hers who works at one of the only shops downtown that caters exclusively to robots. By the time she made it downtown, it was human lunch hour, and most shops were closed. That was fine. Her first destination was a store that catered to robots. Sleeves and More was located in a wedge-shaped 20th century department store that had been bombed to nothing and rebuilt in the space of 5 years. This was where her friend Lala worked, helping anxious customers with textile and tissue selection. Lala was a bipedal gecko whose turquoise blue skin was flecked with bright orange patches. Her flexible lizard body was topped by a humanoid head, and the thick ribbed pads on her fingers and toes could stick to any surface, which meant she could climb the walls and even scuttle across the ceiling if necessary. Sweetie found her at a display counter, reorganizing a pile of armored tops. The 2 bots hugged. And by the way, all of the bots are kind of communicating using Wi-Fi, so they're all having sort of chats, psychic chats, as it were. Private chat. Sweetie, Lala. Looking good, Lala. I'm so happy to see you. I'm not going by Lala anymore. It's Lemon now. Contact name changed. Lala is now Lemon. Lemon, that suits you. I love what you've done with your head. Did you cut that yourself? Sweetie touched the spot where the skull showed through her scalp. Long story, but yeah, I did it at home. And I'm looking for a new top now. I'm sick of this. She gestured at her torso, pointing at the heavy lumps of her human breasts, currently hidden beneath a peasant blouse. Lemon sucked her teeth and shook her head at the expensive wares on offer. You want a full new top? Because that's going to cost you. What about just an alteration? Your tissue still looks really good. The gecko pinched Sweetie's arm, testing elasticity, then lifted her blouse and hefted one breast. I can take these off really easy. There will be a seam, but I can make it cute. Honestly, it will take 5 minutes and we can do it off the blockchain. Sweetie hesitated for a second, and Lemon waved her closer. We can grab that booth right over there. Getting rid of another pointless human feature was what she had come to do. All right, let's go. The room was small and bright, its walls covered in cabinets of swatch books. Lemon arranged Sweetie on a table, gently stretching her arms perpendicular to the line of her body. Do you need to keep these nipples? She flicked one. Are you using them? Not really. They're only for show, which has always seemed kind of creepy. Lemon snorted. That makes my job a lot easier. She pulled a tray of spools out of a drawer. What kind of thread do you want? I can match your tissue, or we can do something fun like gold bric-a-brac, or this one with blinkies on it. It's kind of retro and cool. She held up a strand of nearly translucent wire. Minute LED beads clung to it like raindrops on a spider web. You can program it to do colors and patterns. Blinkies matched Sweetie's mood. She turned off her visual sensors and nociceptors, smiling while her friend worked. One breast thumped into the recycling bin, then the next. Lemon lined up the remaining tissues carefully, sewing and snipping off the excess, measuring each side to be sure the seam was even. Check you out! She nudged Sweetie off the table toward a mirror. Restarting visuals, she looked at the pink seam stretched across her chest at roughly the latitude where her nipples once were. Now unburdened, her torso felt lighter and more compact. Reaching out to the thread internally, she found its interface and turned it on. Suddenly, her scar glittered green, like chips of sea glass catching the light. This looks even better than I thought it would. You're a genius, Lemon. It's true. I love that thread, and nobody ever wants it. I think if you're gonna have a seam, then own it. Make it beautiful. Impulsively, Sweetie grabbed Lemon and gave her kisses on both cheeks. You did make it beautiful. How much do I owe you? Nothing. You don't need to pay. Still, Sweetie wanted to pay her something. How about if I buy a shirt? Help me find one, and then I have to go pick up some oil at the depot. Deal. 20 minutes later, Sweetie was skating over the first street footbridge in a boxy crochet top, LEDs clearly visible through its open weave. The wind rushed across her chest and legs, while the sun blasted her with energy. It felt so good that she found herself smiling at the shocked expressions on a few of the humans riding the escalator down to the tube depot with her. After 2 more escalators, she reached the vast warehouse below the San Francisco Transit Center, where pneumatic tubes from all across the state converged, dumping cargo containers or snorting them up. Tubes wriggled across the ceiling, and their apertures yawned open in the walls. There were car-sized tubes for machinery and other bulk items, and small ones for cell cultures and electronic components. Every time a container marked perishable thumped past overhead, she felt a burst of excitement. She loved knowing that deliveries like these were headed to her restaurant every week. Sweetie came to a roaring stop on her uncontrollable wheels, nearly slamming into the operator window. A human with cat whiskers tattooed on her cheeks appeared out of the back and swiped Sweetie's mobile for the delivery data. She returned with a cylindrical box covered in a palimpsest of stamps and stickers. As she handed the box to Sweetie, the human spoke shyly. Hey, I love your implants. That's so cool. It looks like there's a bot erupting out of your skull. I am a bot. Sweetie rolled her eyes, a human gesture to make the point that she wasn't human. She skated backwards so the cat-faced woman could see her 3 bare metal legs through the service window. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize, I couldn't see, I thought. Sweetie stuffed the oil in her backpack and raced to the escalator so she wouldn't have to hear the rest of the cringe. Humans had a ritual of putting things on to show who they were inside. She was on the opposite path, a simpler one, showing who she was on the inside by taking off the outer layers. Bots understood that. But humans, they couldn't imagine nakedness as truth. They needed adornment. Thank you. This is Crystal. We're going to have a conversation.
Hey everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you today, especially since you started with my favorite part in the entire book. There was no way you were going to have a conversation with a trans girl and not talk about Sweetie and Sweetie's, I want to say gender exploration. Sweetie, more than maybe some of the other characters, seems to engage with their identity a little bit deeper than some of the others. Each character has their own challenges that they're going through throughout the book. But as you read towards the end of that section, it's not just about gender for Sweetie, right? Sweetie was designed to look female, to look like a woman. But there's one line here that I wrote down, like, she realized at one point something about seeing her own skull gave her an angry burst of hope. She sees her chrome underneath the skin. And I wondered, as somebody who's spent time thinking about gender or identity through robots. What do they have to, what have you learned? What do robots have to teach us? What can we learn from these robots about understanding ourselves and that journey?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I think that a lot of us, when we imagine robots, we think of robots as being kind of like men who have transcended their bodies. You know, that they're kind of like the classic robot that comes to mind is either like the Terminator or like the Daleks from Doctor Who, right? Which are just like literally brains inside trash cans with like toilet plungers attached. But the same thing is really true of the Terminator as well. Like the Terminator is just like a big metal skeleton, and they're not. We don't think of them as sensual. We don't think of them as having physical pleasures or physical desires. We think of their desires as being things like, how can I crush humans? But actually, I think that the way that robots are being conceived of now, even in labs, not just in the imagination of science fiction writers, is that they'll be much more like soft bodied. They're going to imitate the structures of biological organisms. In the process of writing this book and afterward, I visited a lot of labs devoted to what's called soft robotics, which is basically making robots that are not humanoid looking, that are made with different kinds of soft materials, kind of rubberized materials or plastics, that allow them to squish into little tiny places, that allow them to swim, to walk through mud. And their bodies don't look in any way like a classic humanoid. You know, they don't have arms and legs the way we know them. Robots are going to have many different morphologies, just like Lemon, who is basically a gecko, who's designed to be able to walk up walls. There are people designing robots now that have gecko-like feet because they want them to be able to, you know, walk on the ceiling if necessary. Who knows what that might be good for, other than spying on people? Like, I'm sure there'll be other good reasons. And people are trying to design flying robots too. And so I think that when we get away from that paradigm of the robot as something that has transcended its body, we start to realize that robots are in fact more fully embodied in ways that we can't even conceive of. They're more fully embodied than humans in some sense because they have the ability to change their shape so easily. And they can, you know, add an arm, or if they want to change, you know, how their chest looks, they can just go to like a clothing store. That was such a fantasy for me. Like as someone who had gone through top surgery, like at the sort of early on in the writing of this book, I was just like, I wish I could just like go to like a haberdasher.
Gender Walmart.
Just like, you know, or like just like the gender like person who's like the local like haberdasher, you know.
Sort of like a tattoo, like
Yes.
like the stitching for Sweetie reminded me of getting a tattoo, body modification.
Yeah, where it's just like, hey, what do you want? You can look however you want to, you know. And there's this kind of invitation in the robot body that, you know, add an arm if you want, add some wings, add some sensory perception that you didn't have before, you know, add infrared vision, or one of the other characters who is a soft-bodied robot, Cayenne, who's an octopus, modifies their bodies so that they have taste sensors on their arms. So suddenly they gain the ability to taste food. And so I think like what that teaches us about gender and more broadly embodiment is that bodies are a lot more diverse than we really acknowledge. Even now with being aware of, you know, trans identity and non-binary identity, there's so many other ways that bodies can be different and can change over time. You know, the way you live in your body, you know, it feels very different to be in a 15-year-old body versus a 55-year-old body, and the things you can do with your body change. And not to mention like all the ways that bodies can be many different shapes or many different abilities, being disabled, which is a big theme in this book. A lot of the robots have to modify things in order to get around because they don't have legs, for example. And so I think it just invites us to think like 20 steps beyond gender to like the next weirdest thing. Like, okay, great, you modified your gender, but now what are you gonna do? Like, how many knees do you have? You know, like, if you want to know an extra nose, like, how about like, the ability to hear subsonic sounds? You know, like, I just think we need to let robots show us how weird and delightful and sensual our bodies can be in ways that don't follow the rules.
I love that. Talk back maybe into our own humanity, but also the ways in which we already use, the ways we already use technology, your glasses, my acrylic nails, these things we don't think of as technologies, but they help us to be more to instinct new spaces and change ourselves.
Yeah.
I feel like the way that you're talking, you sound very tech optimism to me, and I feel like we're living in a period of like, being terrified of AI, algorithms. These algorithms 2 years ago, thinking of the fear of these things, state surveillance, of course. Your book begins with an epigraph, and I'm a geek for epigraphs, that says, if everything means something else, then so does technology. Because I'm just wondering, what else does technology mean to you? Do you feel like an optimist, or am I like, what's...
I'm hopeful. I don't think I'm an optimist. I definitely have a lot of arguments with people who describe themselves as tech optimists. I mean, I live in San Francisco, so like, you can't walk out the door with somebody trying to like sell you a cryptocurrency or like tell you the good news about AI. And yeah, it's like, get ready. So I am not that sort of optimist. I am hopeful about the future of humanity, and I'm hopeful that we can use technology for healthcare and for accessibility and to help people get around who otherwise might have difficulty. I think so. That epigraph is actually one of my favorite quotes from Frederick Jameson, R.I.P., who's a great philosopher, American philosopher, and he was really interested in allegory. Like, he was a literary critic most of all, and he really believed that almost every narrative kind of had an allegorical component to it. Even the movie Jaws, even Star Trek, even stuff that gets treated like just pop culture and nothing more. And his idea is that technology is also a metaphor, and it allows us to tell stories about ourselves, but it also allows us to think through systemic problems, systemic issues like how capitalism shapes our futures. And I think right now, like, a lot of the anxiety around AI is really anxiety about capitalism. And this is something that Ted Chiang has written about really eloquently in some articles that he did for the New Yorker about what is AI really, what are we talking about here? And he said really it's about the power of corporations to extract labor from us without compensating us, and extract resources from cultural productions, from paintings, from things we've written, from ideas. And so I feel like the technology that I have in this book is really kind of an effort to engage with some of the claims that you hear from companies like OpenAI, which is creating ChatGPT, which is kind of the most widely used large language model. How many people have played with ChatGPT or been forced to? Okay. Has anyone been told that they have to use it at work? Yeah, okay. Sorry, you guys. Yeah, and so this is like a tool that is being kind of shoved down a lot of people's throats, largely because OpenAI has a lot of money and has made a lot of deals with companies to use their product. And it's not something that is particularly useful, but OpenAI makes this promise in their advertising where they say, what we're really working on is creating artificial general intelligence, AGI, which is basically human equivalent intelligence in a box, right? Like literally they're trying to make artificial people. So not something that can just be like a stochastic parrot and spit out a bunch of stuff, but like something that would be like you or me, but would be owned by OpenAI. So they want to make people that they will sell to you. And so I thought, as I was working on this book, I was like, all right, I don't believe that they're going to make people. I don't think they have that technology, but let's say that they did. Let's take them at their word. Let's take it at face value and say, all right, buds, so you're trying to build a person. You're trying to build a business model on building people. So you keep telling us that AI is going to take over the world and take our jobs, but what would really happen if you actually invented an artificial person? And I'll tell you what would happen. That would be an enslaved person because their business model is based on selling people or people that don't exist yet, but they claim that they're inventing. And so that's the dilemma that these robots are dealing with in this book is that they have, they're robots with AI minds, and the nation of California has given them a tiny number of civil rights, unlike in the United States where they're still all enslaved. And so they're able to work, they're able to choose where they work, but they can't open bank accounts, they can't join unions, they can't get married, they can't have a lot of different controls over their lives. So they're kind of like half citizens of the new nation of California. They're somewhere in between citizen and not citizen. And I think that's a very realistic scenario, which is not a very optimistic scenario, actually. And in fact, in all of my books, I deal with robots who've been enslaved in one way or another, because I think that's where these corporate models are taking us. And so I think where the hope comes from is that these robots have figured out a way, like so many marginalized and enslaved and oppressed people in the past, they figured out a way to find some joy and to find happiness in their allegiance with each other, and sneakily finding legal loopholes that let them have, for a brief time, this business that is theirs, which isn't supposed to be theirs. They're not actually supposed to be able to own a business, but they've kind of, you'll find out. They've figured out a sneaky way to do it. And so this is really a book that's kind of about hope in a time of extreme difficulty and precarity. So I guess that's a way of saying I am not optimistic, but I am hopeful.
You are, and you have a lot of faith in, I hate to call it humanity with the robots, but you have faith in people. With people, hearts and coming together and building something beautiful, hopefully.
I do, and I think that that's why I really wanted to set it in the wake of a war, because I think it's in these times when we've all been through incredible hardships together that people do come together. And also it's a moment for reimagining social relationships. The whole city, the whole state has just been bombed to shit. So they are having to rebuild from the ground up. And they're not just rebuilding physical infrastructure, they're rebuilding their social infrastructure. And so these robots are stepping out there and saying, like, listen, we're robots, but we're also your neighbors. We're part of the community too. And the space that they build in the restaurant, it's a human space, but it's also a bot space. Like they end up figuring out ways to bring robots in, even though strictly speaking, robots don't eat. But they enjoy being in a nice restaurant with good music and friends. So they like to play video games, and all that stuff is available to them in the restaurant.
I love thinking about this book as a response to this AI company's dehumanization. Right? And thinking of technology, I can't help but think of the power of storytelling, the technology that you wield, which is a very old technology, of course, the power of storytelling. And I'm sort of curious, how do you have big ideas about how does storytelling disrupt some of these terrible things that are going on in our own reality by dealing with alternate realities? Can you speak to that a little?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think of storytelling as a technology, especially right now, talking about something like OpenAI, which is literally hoovering up all of our stories and feeding it into their large language models to, I guess, basically write really bad student papers. It seems like it's the main use case right now. Or like really bad legal briefs with lots of like
My coworkers are using it to write emails, saying, yes.
There you go. Yeah. So to write really, really bizarrely long emails. It's like I needed 3 paragraphs to tell you I will not be at school today. So yeah, that's the LLM way. So I do think that storytelling can work as a way of, I mean, when you have a story out there like you know, what we hear a lot now, which is that it's inevitable that we will all have to adopt AI. It's inevitable that these large corporations that command billions of dollars will run our lives. We also are inundated with stories about how what's happening to our government is just inevitable, and there's just really no way to stop it, and that's, you know, just what's going on, and we're just going to have to make the best of it. And I mean, I think that's where the power of counter narrative really comes in, about telling stories about how we can, of course, change things. We can disrupt political processes. We can challenge corporations, but also we can challenge narratives about who's a person and who isn't. And that's really that's the sort of small ask of this book. Like, this is a book that, you know, would love to topple capitalism, but is just going to be happy with the idea of you maybe one day being nice to somebody who doesn't look the way you expect them to look. And so I think that the goal of a story like this is to, by getting us to empathize with robots who look like an octopus or who look like a barrel with arms attached, that it helps us kind of think through what empathy means and what it means to identify with someone who's different from us, or identify with someone who has been described as not being a person, and realizing that they are a person. To go back to what we started with trans identity, and how currently we live in a country where, for example, the president has declared that my identity doesn't exist. Like, you can't be non-binary. There's 2 genders. That's all that are permitted in the United States. And so anytime you have a counter narrative to that, a story about, say, robots that are non-binary or queer, or you know, people who are asserting their personhood despite being described as objects, I think it can push back. And I think that's just through using empathy, you know, through getting people to identify with characters that they might not think of as, like I said.
Thanks, that's beautiful. You do that primarily, I think, in the book around food, obviously. You have noodles on the actual cover, but it's so much more than the yang noodles. You have recipes to make ramen, crispy falafel, all sorts of recipes and moments of coming together around food are in this novel. And I guess I wondered why that was important to you. Why did that speak to you? I think we often, people who need to come together as chosen family, right? That's sort of like a meeting place. The table or sharing space. And I wondered if you had any maybe personal stories that this was sort of bringing up for you, or personal connection to like making family around food, or why is this activity personally important to you?
I do love food.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not a gourmet. Like, I really like a big plate of yummy food. It can be messy. It doesn't need to be, you know, elevated or have foam on it or anything like that. I mean, no shade on foam. Like, I have really, really tasty foam at my time. But a big plate of steaming noodles to me feels like it's very humble and delicious. And Beyond noodles really are my favorite kind of noodle currently, out of all of the many, many types of noodles that I've tasted. And partly it is because they're a humble noodle. You know, they don't have to look perfect. In fact, the thing that makes a good Beyond noodle is kind of its excessive wideness. Like they're big, you know, they're not some like dainty little swirl. They're like wide and thick and chewy. And I love that about them. And the way they're made requires a certain amount of artistry, which the robots have to learn. But the other thing about food that's interesting with robots is that, again, the typical story you hear about robots and food is like, okay, robots are going to come in and replace cooks, chefs. You know, they're going to come in and they're going to create this sterile, you know, kind of bland TV dinner food. And like I don't know if you guys watch endless videos of robots on the internet like I do, but there are a lot of labs that are developing cooking robots that look kind of like the character Hans in here, who has two arms attached to kind of a barrel-shaped body. And their arms, there are kitchens that have been built with tracks in the ceiling so that a robot can kind of dangle from the ceiling and the two arms can kind of go between, you know, the sink and the stove and the countertop and like cook a meal, right? And that's great, but again, that kind of goes back to this negative story that I wanted to push back on, where like robots are going to do all of our work for us and won't have any kind of sensual engagement with what they're doing or aesthetic pleasure. And so I wanted to write about robots who enjoy food in the wrong way. So the way you're supposed to enjoy food as humans, we've all been taught, you're supposed to swallow it, right? You're supposed to put it in your mouth, taste it, chew it. If you're my mom, you'd be like, chew it a bunch of times. Which I think maybe in rebellion, I do not chew enough. I've been told that this is actually kind of a problem. But anyway, so you're supposed to chew and you're supposed to swallow. And these robots obviously cannot swallow food. Well, that isn't obvious, but I will tell you, spoilers, they cannot swallow. However, they can taste and they can feel textures. And so they actually are getting incredible sensual pleasure out of the food. And they'll do things like mash their hands into the food and like feel the texture of it. And it's very sensual for them. And indeed, like texture is a big part of food, right? Like sometimes, like my nephew will sometimes be like, I will not eat this because texture. Or I will eat it, right? Because I really like these chewy noodles. And some people find like chewy stuff to be really gross. Some people think bananas have a bad texture because they're just wrong. But there's like bananas have a very specific texture that some people are just like, no. So these robots can access that experience of texture and the flavors, the smells, the all of the things, everything about food except the swallowing. And for some reason, I think as humans, we just think that's just the wrong way to enjoy food. That's the wrong way to eat. And these robots are like, no, that's how we enjoy the food. And so I think that's part of like the joy of writing this is like to say that, you know what, there's no one way to feel pleasure. Like you are allowed to enjoy things however the fuck you want. Okay? You don't have to do it the way they told you to. And that's what the robots are doing. You know, they're like rebuilding their bodies, they're rebuilding their relationship with the world, and they like to squish noodles.
It's so beautiful. Thank you for this. We all need to read this book. I think we've got 20 minutes left, which I feel like people are gonna have questions. And let's, right? Do you ready?
I am ready. I'm ready. Any question?
Would like to ask a question.
What was the
You're
what was the first thing that got you into science or science fiction? Do you have like a memory, like core memory of, oh, this is what I like now, and then you explore stuff from there?
Yeah, I mean, so like a lot of geeky kids, I got into science pretty young, and I do remember what it was because my mom was a teacher, and so she would get me lots of books and magazines, and at some point in the 1970s, she subscribed me to a magazine called World, which was a kids magazine published by National Geographic. So it was all like National Geographic level science stuff, like it was space and dinosaurs, but it was aimed at like an elementary school kid. And I remember the exact day when there was one of the magazines came out and the cover story was we had discovered black holes. And I was like, oh, yes, so cool. And I just thought it was You know, I mean, I think space is often for science nerds, like space is kind of a gateway drug for a lot of us, like learning about the distant reaches of the universe. And from there, I just, yeah, I always had an interest in following science news. And like I said, dinosaurs, I think, were a big part of my childhood as well. But yeah, I eventually, once I was in college, I started studying not science, but representations of science. I was really interested in how science was represented in the media. And so I kind of learned about science from a weird backdoor. Yeah, and so it's been definitely like a lifelong thing, as well as noodles, actually. So I've also enjoyed noodles for about as long as I've enjoyed black holes. So.
What's your favorite San Francisco thing that made it into the book?
Oh, that made it into the book. Okay. Well, there's actually a bunch of favorite things that are in the book, and some of them may not be obvious. So my local bookstore, Noe Valley Books, is in the book. And they hosted my book launch a few days ago in the neighborhood where this is set. And I had a lot of fun actually with deciding which businesses would survive the war and which buildings would survive the war. So also one of the things that survives that is something that I love very much is we have a local free online publication called 48 Hills in San Francisco, which is run by my former boss, the San Francisco Bay Guardian, which was our free weekly RIP. And so I wanted to imagine that free alternative news would continue to exist. But as for things like bigger things, I am afraid, destroy all of the bridges, which is why we have lots of tunnels now. We have lots of pneumatic tubes in the city. But one thing that I have in the book that this is going to sound like a really odd answer, but as I was writing, I learned a lot about the waterways of San Francisco that have been diverted and buried by the city. And I figured once you had a war and you just blew everything up, a lot of those waterways would come back. And so there's a seasonal river that goes down our main street in San Francisco, which is called Market Street, because we are a white settler city and we named our street Market Street in center of the city. And without that street there, you would every year during the rainy season have a big stream going through the center of the city, and so that is being rebuilt in the book, and they're rebuilding downtown with a stream bed for that seasonal stream. And I've always wanted to see that seasonal stream, and so I really liked just imagining that we would have water running there, where now there's just a bunch of cars. So yeah.
Yeah, so I really love both Automatic Noodle and the Terraformers, and they feel very of a kind to me. Like they could potentially be on, in the same world, just very far apart. And
They're set in the same world. Yeah.
And I was just wondering, like, since Automatic Noodle is set in a pretty short time period, and the Terraformers takes place over many hundreds of years. If you had any thoughts about the advantages of each sort of time scale.
That is such a good question. I never thought about that. Yeah, because this is actually set over. I feel like it's set over like a few months, basically. I had to do a timeline because that I wrote to a bunch of Post-it notes because the characters have rent to pay and they also have to pay off their indenture payments. And so I was tracking to make sure that they were making enough money. So yeah, it's a few months. I think that, the reason in Terraformers that I wanted to have that big, long span of time. So Terraformers takes place over a couple thousand years. And it's about, ecological processes that take thousands of years to really ripen. Basically, they're trying to grow ecosystems on this planet. And so I wanted with that book to have the time scale of deep time and of basically geological time, because I wanted the reader to be able to see how environmental impacts unfold. That's just, I think, one of the reasons why we have such a difficult time now with convincing people of things like climate change or habitat transformation, is that in a human life, we might not really see how pumping fossil fuels into the environment is changing things. Like you might be like, well, it's a little hotter, but you're not going to see like the full unfolding. But in terraformers, because it is thousands of years, we can see how things that they do, I'm sorry, how things that they do like 1,000 years later are having an impact. So, so it's a great scale for an environmental sci-fi story. But this is much more of a story about everyday life. You know, it's about starting a business. And for anyone who's ever started a business or nonprofit or anything like that, you know that there's like a phase of like intensely working your ass off for like several months, and then you kind of wait. And so I wanted to give that sense of pacing to it, of like, we're working really super hard for a few months, and like we're going to see if it pays off. My first novel takes place over like, I think it's only like 2 weeks or something, which was because it was a thriller, and I think thrillers are usually like really fast like that. I didn't know it was a thriller when I started writing it. I just literally didn't know how to write, and I didn't know how to make time pass when I was writing. So I was just like, okay, I guess I'm just like, time is passing in real time. Like I don't know how to just say like a week passed. I just didn't know how to do it. And so now I know how. So I'm now I can make a week pass. But yeah, so but yeah, that's it. This is definitely yeah, it's a small scale story.
Could you talk a little bit about your process for creating the robot characters? I feel like you do such a beautiful job. Like every time I read these books that you write, I'm like, I have like so like I don't know, I just love the characters so much. They're so like beautifully developed. And I'm wondering like, yeah, what your process is like, and then do you ever like start creating a character that's a robot and you're like, this is exactly like my friend or something like that.
Well, I'll start with the last question first. Yeah, of course. Like we all, I think the secret, of course, of all art is we are taking things in our life and transforming them in our minds and making them something else. So yes, I mean, my friends are in here for sure. And in fact, I like to name drop people. And so my nephew Owen, who's going off to college, there's a character in here briefly who appears for like just a split second, where there's some kids that come in and they're like, oh, we're gonna bring some noodles back to Owen. He's learning how to like spicy food. And that's because Owen had told me a few days before, like, okay, I'm really trying to learn to like spicy food. Reader, he has not yet learned to like spicy food. So yeah, there's definitely, and especially because this is set in the neighborhood where I live in San Francisco, there's a lot of like my feelings about my family and stuff going into it, and my friends who are my family. And but for coming up with robot characters, I think that a human character, but you have to think about the influence our perceptions and how our bodies influence the way that we talk to other people and interact with other people. So a lot of the time when I'm thinking about these characters, I'm like, okay, so just to pick on Cayenne, the squishy robot character, who is obsessed with cryptocurrency for many reasons. And I also have some friends who are obsessed with cryptocurrency. And so I have heard a lot about that, but I kept thinking about, okay, so this is like a cryptocurrency person, but they're in the body of this squishy robot who can use colored lights under their skin to kind of express their emotions, much the way a real life octopus does. Because octopuses have chromatophores in their skin, and they use that to communicate with each other. And sometimes with people, like they'll be like flashing red at a person, and the diver is like, "What? I don't know what flashing red means." But there's anyway. So this is another thing I look at online is octopus videos. I apologize. So I kept thinking like, all right, well, how would it be to be in an octopus body? How would that change your relationship with the physical world? there's a moment when Cayenne, has added taste sensors to their legs, but they don't have enough money to pay for all of the firmware upgrades. And so for a brief period, they can't turn them off, which is unfortunate because they have to rescue a friend from the sewer. And so I was thinking about that, like that's the kind of thing that you and I probably wouldn't experience. You wouldn't like dunk your foot into the sewer and taste it, but Cayenne does. And so that kind of shapes that character. The other thing that I love about robots, and this appears in every single one of my novels, I think, with robots in it, is that they can communicate wirelessly, and so they're constantly texting each other. And in the terraformers, of course, there's non-human animals that can also do that. So there's moose who are like psychically communicating with each other, as moose probably are anyway. That's what I assume is going on. And so I love that idea of being able, kind of the way we do, like if you're texting, like if you're in a meeting and you're texting a friend, like that kind of consciousness where you're like, you're paying attention, you're like trying to be present, but you're also like, what the hell to your friend. And so that's like, to me, that's like a robot consciousness, is that they would be doing that plus like 10 other things, right? So they're also looking something up. They're also like thinking about noodles, and they're texting and they're talking and they're acting like they're doing customer service all at the same time. So that's kind of how it starts for me. It's like it starts with a person and a personality, and then how does their body and how do the affordances of that body shape their perceptions and their communication. So yeah, I'm right. The novel that I'm almost done writing right now is about a slime mold. And so who's a grad student, and so it's so cool because they can stretch out arms, as many arms as they want. So like, whew, there's just so much tentacle stuff going on in that book. And I keep forgetting that I don't have like as many arms as I want. So like, I only have 2. I mean, and I have legs, but those are not really arms. Other questions? Yeah, someone back.
Characters are fascinating, and I'm wondering, are you working with an artist to maybe draw these out to see them?
That would be so incredible to do that. I wish I could. Definitely the artist who did the cover of this book, Eric Nyquist, he read the book and he drew the characters. So you can see Hans's hand at the top, and there's Stay Behind and Sweetie, and then Cayenne is on the back, the little octopus guy. And those are pretty accurate, actually, because he did it based on what I had written. Usually when I'm writing, one of my big problems is visualizing characters, and I'm not a great artist. So I do sometimes sketch them. I definitely will sketch maps and like try to draw like buildings and stuff that I'm writing about if they're not obvious, if it's not just like a building that I already know. But I do think that having that visual is really helpful, like having a visual in mind. And so when I was developing these robot characters, that is part of why I was watching videos of robots, because I was finding actual robots to base them on. And I found, like, with Sweetie, I just randomly found this amazing paper about how 3-wheeled robots, specifically 3-wheeled, would navigate in an urban landscape. And I was like, great, somebody's already figured this out. So I do stuff like that. And then one of the things that I did, because I'm a complete weirdo, is the robots, they create a website for their restaurant, which is at automaticnoodle.website. If you go on your phones, you will discover that we made it. So I worked with a friend, Mike Montero, who's a website designer in San Francisco. We made a retro 1990s style website, just like the robots would like. And we hired an artist, Lucy Bellwood, who does webcomics. She's amazing down in LA. And so she designed the logo for the restaurant. So we did do that, and that was incredibly amazing and gratifying. And you actually can also buy all the restaurant swag that the robots are selling in the book. So there's T-shirts and pins. I brought a bunch of stickers, so I'll give you some stickers. And yeah, so I like to do stuff like that. But yeah, one day, the goal is one day I will work with someone who can help me design characters while I'm writing. That would be incredible. So yeah.
We have maybe one more question in front.
The book that you wrote about the 4 lost cities, including Boki Mountains just across the river. I can't articulate this question too well, but I think you'll know what I mean. How does the research that you did for that interact with the research that you do for a book about robots, which is more an imaginary thing than tracking down what happened objectively? And how do those two aspects of your life interact?
It's a good question. I mean, so when I'm doing journalism, like if I'm researching archaeology, I do tell the truth to the greatest extent that I possibly can, right? So I interview a bunch of scientists and experts, I read papers, I fact check it. And yeah, that's a really different process than starting from nothing. I switch back and forth between writing fiction and nonfiction because nonfiction is tiring because you have to fact check everything, right? So everything is there. You don't need to invent anything, but you have to make sure that you're accurately describing it, which means you have to go over it again and again, and you have to check with your experts and make sure that you haven't made mistakes, which I'm sure I do, but I try very hard not to. And then I get so sick of fact checking that I'm like, great, I'm just gonna go make a bunch of shit up. Nobody needs to fact check this. I mean, with some exceptions, there of course, I do show it to expert readers and stuff, but nobody's checking to make sure, like, did this actually happen in 2064? But then, like, what gets tiring about that is you have to make everything up. Like, nothing is real, right? You're like, okay, I have to make up what every single person looks like, where they go, every possible thing. Like when I was doing terraformers and I had a whole other planet, I had to invent a planet. Extremely exhausting, very gratifying, but then it made me really want to go back to just doing science journalism and be like, just tell me what's true, okay? I'm just going to write it down. Like, don't need to make it up. So I think that's the difference. And then, of course, they always bleed into each other. Like if you read the nonfiction book that I wrote before this, which is called Stories or Weapons, it's a history of psychological warfare in the United States. It's very traumatizing to write, so that is definitely part of why I wanted to just eat noodles for like a year. But also there's a subplot in here that's about psyops and that's about online influence campaigns and propaganda. And that came right out of working on Stories or Weapons and wishing that there was a great way to defeat online propaganda. And so kind of living with characters who are working on that and are trying to defeat online propaganda was pretty gratifying. It felt really good. But it is also, it's always tough, to kind of, to try to shave off the urge to be super realistic when I'm doing fiction, and then vice versa, shave off the urge to get fictional. But I do it, and that's why things are labeled fiction and nonfiction. And it's good, it's a very, very good exercise, especially right now, to remember that, that there really is a difference, and there's a difference in how we write it, there's a difference in why we read it, and they're not the same thing, and don't mistake one for the other, obviously. I don't suspect anyone in this room has a problem, but yeah.
Any parting words before we send some books?
Well, like I said, I have stickers. I urge you all to go eat something tasty sometime this weekend. Eat something tasty, and you can eat it however you want. So thank you so much for coming out.
Yeah.